And we have to be able to house like the great minds that we have in this country.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Change and the Market, your mindful guide to the ever-changing real estate world. My name is Peyton Beck, and with me, as always, is trendsetter, real estate entrepreneur, and two-time best-selling author, almost three-time, I bet, Chris Masiello. Chris, how are you today?
Good, Peyton. Good to be with everybody.
Short plug. Chris is releasing his third book coming up. He didn't ask me to talk about that, but just going to plug that really quick. But Chris, what are we talking about today?
Well, thanks. You're right. I didn't give you a plug,
nope,
but
not at all.
When I go home today, the proof print will be there. So once we sign off on that, it'll launch. Yeah.
That's awesome. So, that's very, very cool. Well,
and the book is dedicated to everybody in our company.
It's an exciting time. But Chris, today, what are we talking about here on Changing the Market?
Well, I think we're going to talk about demographics. We've been threatening to talk about this for a while, and now with all the clickbait out of the way, we can actually talk about something that's something that matters.
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, and it's I think along with this side of, we've been seeing more articles about things talking like the silver tsunami and all this jazz about our older demographic. What's going to happen whenever they are no longer in the market, or what's the market like currently, and how are those various influences impacting today?
We've talked about this in terms of having it be a component of the housing market, but we haven't really specifically focused on the demographics, which quite frankly, I think is as much of a story about today's housing reset as anything else, inventory, interest rates and all that, the demographics really kind of drive this. So we'll include this chart for everybody.
So talking about demographics, I really want to jump in and make sure we have those outlined, right? So we have the baby boomers who are from 1946 to 64. We have Gen X, which is 65 through 80, millennials, which is 81 through 96, and then Gen Z, which is 97 and 2012.
Well, of course, that's the coolest generation.
Oh, for sure.
Right. Yeah. So you have four very distinct groups that are all orbiting housing, that all have, very specific needs that are drawing down on an already short housing supply. And I think that's as much of the story of this housing reset. I'm reluctant to call it a housing cycle, because I think we're really in kind of like a permanent reset, because we've been underproducing housing now for, depending on who you want to listen to, anywhere between 10 to 15 years. That's a long time. While that undersupply has been occurring, we have these different demographic groups that have all come of age to housing. We've never really experienced that before. When probably the last time we experienced something like this was the end of the Second World War, right? When servicemen and women were returning, home, right, from their service, and obviously there was a need for housing, and the climate though for housing was different. Communities were very pro housing. They wanted to make it efficient and easy enough, for families to have homes. We have a slightly different climate now where it's not particularly, housing friendly. And so that's the dynamic that we have. And you have those demographic groups that are all basically competing for the same house. So for instance, what would be a downsize for, maybe a late baby boomer, somewhere in their, 60s, 70s, 80s, right? Would also, so maybe one story living, a ranch or something like that, right? Would also be maybe a starter home for people just starting a family, right? That would fall into the other, into the younger demographic groups that you mentioned. And so now you have two different demographic groups with two different reasons for moving, but all competing for the same housing.
Well, yeah, and the flip side of that, right? Because if you have that boomer who's moved out of this house, that their house probably isn't that entry home level home, right? It's probably a 5-bedroom where they raise their family, and it's probably not something a new homeowner could buy.
Yeah, and one of the groups that's getting kind of starved off, right, from inventory is the move up market, where people growing families and things like that, they need a little bit more room, they need an extra bedroom, whatever, a bath or playroom or whatever. There's that group is particularly challenged because, as you pointed out, your baby boomers are hanging on to their houses a little longer, their bigger houses longer. And so, yeah, I mean, you have a little bit of a demographic perfect storm. There was also this kind of misplaced notion years ago. I'm going to go back probably 10 or 15 years, that millennials in particular would prefer to be renters and wouldn't want the responsibility of home ownership, which that never made any sense to me. And so because you want for your kids what you had when you were growing up, a backyard, a swing set, a neighborhood, ride your bikes around, all that type of stuff. So that was another reason why there was a lot of apartment buildings built, over the last 10 or 15 years, because there's this notion that this next flight of families would not be home ownership friendly, and it's turned out to be just the opposite, dramatically the opposite, which is, I think, in part again what's created this housing reset that we're experiencing.
Yeah, well, and if you guys look at the chart, which again will be linked in this video will be linked to in this video. I mean, it's very clear that even my generation now, we're just as, if not, I mean, according to the chart, more hungry for housing. Which again, yeah, that's the idea of we don't have it, or it's not here, and if it is, it's way harder to get. Which is it's just an interesting dynamic, like we've been talking about. I mean, Chris, is there an end to this? Is there a solution? Is there where are we looking with all of these pieces?
Yeah. Well, there's always a solution and an end to things, right? I mean, nothing lasts forever. I think that as the current baby boomers, as they start to get in their latter years, inventory will start to become available. Just people will be going into assisted living and other things, right? So I think that will start to loosen up some inventory. That's going to take a bit, though, right? It's not going to happen overnight. Also, I do think that there is kind of a burgeoning understanding that, we need housing. And it's kind of funny because, like, when we talk about infrastructure, okay, for a community or a country, right, our country, right, we think about it in terms of like, water and sewer and schools and highways and, rotaries and hospitals and things like that. We don't really think of housing as infrastructure. It is. If you want to sustain a workforce, well, what do you need? Well, you need schools and shopping and hospitals and recreation and all that, but you equally need housing. Housing is infrastructure. And I think there's a very slow recognition of the fact that housing is as important infrastructure as putting in a hospital or putting in a new school or upgrading the highway system or putting in a traffic light, right? Or putting in a new park or lights at the high school football stadium, right? I mean, this is housing as infrastructure. I think there's this kind of like slow understanding that, well, this country is so dynamic. And we talked about this before, right? Almost 50% of all the research and development money on the globe, the planet, is in the United States. So this country has this very, rich, dynamic, ethos to it. And we have to be able to house like the great minds that we have in this country. We have this amazing workforce, we have immigration, people want to come here. I mean, we're such a rich country. And to think that we have a housing shortage, which is now becoming almost systemic, it doesn't quite scan. It doesn't quite make sense. And I think that communities and certainly the governmental entities are beginning to really understand that now housing is an infrastructure, because if you can't support your workforce, right? If you can't house your workforce, that's a problem. And so, I think that like everything else, they'll there'll be a broader understanding of the fact that, yeah, this is an infrastructure issue that we have to deal with, and it really is a grassroots issue. It can't be done at a federal level. It has to be done at a community level. And communities, when they want to be, municipalities, state and local governments, they can be pretty creative, and they can be pretty entrepreneurial when they want to be. That's probably what happens next. Is people in communities start to figure out that, hey, wait a minute, we want to grab some tax dollars. We need new schools, or we need, we need new infrastructure. What's the best way to do that? Tax dollars from real estate. That's probably what comes next. It'll start to break the logjam.
Very cool. No, and that makes a lot of sense. But until then, that is going to do it for us today on this episode of Change and the Market. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you've liked this video, please feel free to like or subscribe or comment, whatever you feel urged to do. But until next time, we'll catch you guys later on the next episode of Change in the Market.
Take care, everybody.